When my wife Emily and I moved into our new home, I wasn't exactly thrilled about it. Sure, the place was spacious, plenty of room for both of us, but something about it rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was the fact that it used to belong to her late husband. That lingering presence of the past made it feel less like our fresh start and more like a continuation of something I had no part in. The house itself was nice enough, big rooms, cozy living spaces, and more than enough space for us to have our own corners when we needed them. But there was one part of it that I hated, the basement. It wasn't just the usual dark, musty basement that you'd expect in an older house. This one felt different. It was cluttered with all kinds of junk, old boxes stacked so high they looked like they'd been there for decades, random pieces of furniture covered in dust, and things that seemed long forgotten. More than once, I offered to clear it out, but Emily was firm in her refusal. She insisted that everything down there held sentimental value, memories she wasn't willing to let go of. I could have argued, but what was the point? I had my job to focus on, and between long hours and frequent business trips, I barely had time to worry about the mess in the basement. As long as it didn't interfere with my day-to-day life, she could keep all the clutter she wanted. One evening, Emily's friend came over. I wasn't paying much attention, just half listening from the living room while scrolling through work emails. They were chatting in the kitchen when something caught my ear. Her friend mentioned a room. That word made me pause. I looked up. "What room?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Emily barely glanced at me. "Oh, she just means the basement," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. "We talked about maybe fixing it up." That struck me as odd. I had never heard a single word about remodeling the basement before. And the way she dismissed it so quickly, it didn't sit right with me. I considered pressing the issue, but before I could, she changed the subject effortlessly, steering the conversation in a different direction. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. I had more important things to deal with, deadlines, meetings, and the general stress of work. So, I let it go. At least, that's what I told myself. But the thought lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. A few days later, I found myself in the basement looking for some tools. It was the same mess as always, boxes stacked high, dust-covered furniture, and random junk piled in every corner. Nothing seemed different. No signs of remodeling, no changes, no reason for her friend to bring it up like that. I shook my head, pushing the thought away. Maybe it was nothing. If something had actually been going on, I would have noticed, right? With that, I decided to let it go completely. I had better things to focus on than some passing comment about a room. A few weeks passed, and we started settling into our new routine. Then, Emily suggested throwing a housewarming party. She loved social gatherings, and honestly, I didn't mind the idea either. We had a decent-sized circle of friends, and it seemed like a good excuse to unwind. So, we spent the whole day getting everything ready. Emily focused on decorating while I handled the food and drinks. By the time guests started arriving, the house looked great, and the energy was buzzing. Laughter, music, the sound of people chatting, it was exactly the kind of night we'd hoped for. I moved through the crowd, making sure everyone had what they needed, while Emily played the perfect hostess, smiling and laughing with everyone. At some point, as I made my way through the rooms, I realized something. Emily was nowhere to be seen. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was outside, getting some air, or in the kitchen grabbing something. But as I moved through the house, checking room after room, she wasn't there. I asked a couple of friends if they'd seen her, but all I got were shrugs. It wasn't like her to disappear in the middle of a party. She loved the attention, loved being surrounded by people. And yet, she was gone. I stepped out onto the patio, figuring she might be outside. Nothing. I checked upstairs. Nothing. It was odd. And then, just as I was about to start worrying, she reappeared, coming in through the back door with two of her friends. They were all laughing, looking perfectly normal. I walked over, my curiosity still nagging at me. "Where'd you go?" I asked casually. Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, we just stepped out for a smoke," she said, her voice light and easy. Her friends chuckled, nodding along, and everything seemed fine. So, I let it go. Still, I kept an eye on her for the rest of the night. The party carried on without a hitch, and soon enough, The house was filled with nothing but the usual sound of conversation and music. Emily was back to her usual self, laughing and chatting like nothing had happened. Maybe I was reading too much into things. By the time the night wound down and the last guests left, we cleaned up a little before heading to bed. A few days later, I came home early from work. Normally, Emily would be in the living room or the kitchen, but the house was unusually quiet. I figured she might be in the basement, going through all the junk she insisted on keeping. Curious, I made my way down the stairs. As soon as I opened the door, I saw her. She was standing there, frozen in place, with her friend beside her. Both of them turned to look at me, their faces filled with surprise, like I had caught them doing something they shouldn't be doing. My stomach twisted. I took another step down. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice calm, but my mind racing. Emily exchanged a glance with her friend before quickly saying, "Oh, we were just looking for something." An inflatable boat for her boyfriend. I blinked. An inflatable boat? Yeah, she nodded, a little too quickly. I thought we had one down here somewhere. I looked around the basement. The same cluttered mess as always. Stacks of boxes, random furniture, piles of things we hadn't touched in months. But then, something caught my eye. The boxes closest to them. They had been moved. I knew how everything had been stacked before. I had seen it dozens of times. But now, some of the heavier ones seemed out of place, like they had been shifted recently. Emily must have noticed where my eyes had landed because she hurried to say, "It's probably in here somewhere. We just haven't found it yet." I didn't buy it. But instead of pushing, I simply said, "It's in the garage." Her friend let out a small, nervous laugh. "Oh, well, that makes sense." Emily looked relieved. "See? No need to search anymore." I nodded slowly, turning to head back upstairs. "I'll grab it." As I walked to the garage, my mind was working overtime. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out what. I found the inflatable boat exactly where I knew it would be, tucked away in the garage where I had stored it when we first moved in. As I grabbed it and headed back inside, my mind was still turning over what I had just seen in the basement. Emily and her friend had looked startled, way more than they should have been. And those boxes, they had definitely been moved. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they really had just been searching for the boat, and I had just caught them off guard. But that uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. When I got back downstairs, they were still standing there, but the tension had eased a little. I handed the boat over, and Emily's friend smiled, thanking me. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "No problem." I turned and headed back upstairs, not wanting to linger. If something was going on down there, I'd figure it out, but not with them watching me. A little while later, Emily and her friend came up, acting like nothing had happened. They went into the kitchen, laughing and chatting, and Emily asked if I wanted something to eat. I shook my head, pretending to be absorbed in my phone. I told myself to let it go, that it wasn't worth stirring up an argument over what was probably nothing. But I knew myself. This wasn't going to leave my mind any time soon. The following week, work called. There was a situation in another city, and they needed someone with my expertise to handle it. My manager told me to be ready to leave on short notice, but it wasn't confirmed yet. I was used to these last-minute trips, so it didn't throw me off. That night, I sat down with Emily and let her know I might be gone for a few days. She barely reacted, just nodded along as I explained. "How long do you think you'll be gone?" she asked, stirring her drink without really looking at me. "Not sure yet. A few days, maybe a week at most." She took a sip, then casually mentioned that some of her old friends might be coming by while I was away. Something about the way she said it made me pause. "Old friends?" I asked. "Yeah," she shrugged, glancing at me with a small smile. "I haven't seen them in a while. Thought it might be nice to catch up." I didn't think much of it at the time. Emily had always been social. If she wanted to have some friends over while I was gone, that was fine. "Sounds good," I said. "Just don't burn the house down." She laughed, and that was the end of the conversation. Over the next couple of days, I packed a small bag and made sure everything was in order for work. Emily seemed in an unusually good mood, casually mentioning her friends again, saying they were excited to see her. I brushed it off, focused on getting ready for my trip. The night before I left, I got confirmation. I was needed first thing in the morning. Emily gave me a quick kiss and told me to have a safe trip. It all felt normal. The next morning, I grabbed my bag and headed out. She waved me off, smiling, and I promised to call when I landed. As I drove away, I felt good. Work was steady, our home life was calm, and things seemed fine. I had no idea how wrong I was. The trip didn't go as planned. What was supposed to be a complicated issue ended up being a quick fix. Within a day, I had sorted out the problem, and instead of dragging things out, I figured I'd head home early. I thought Emily would be happy to see me ahead of schedule. Maybe we could have a quiet night together, maybe even go out for dinner. So, I got in my car and started the drive back, feeling good. That feeling didn't last. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was the extra cars parked nearby. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a neighbor had visitors. But as I got out of my car and stepped onto the porch, something felt off. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked inside and immediately noticed the muddy footprints on the floor. Emily was a clean freak. She never left the house messy, especially not if she had people over. But these footprints trailed from the front door down the hall, leading toward one place. The basement. I frowned, setting my bag down. Then I noticed the trash bin. It was overflowing, like she hadn't bothered to take it out. And sitting right on top of the pile, unmistakable, was an empty box of condoms. My stomach dropped. Emily and I hadn't used condoms in years. There was absolutely no reason for an empty box to be in our trash. I stood there, staring at it, my brain scrambling to come up with a logical explanation. Nothing made sense. Then I heard it. A muffled thud. From the basement. I turned toward the basement door, my breath catching in my throat. The footprints, the trash, the sound. It was all leading me to one place. For a moment, I hesitated. Did I really want to know what was happening down there? But my feet were already moving before I had time to think. I stepped forward, gripping the doorknob. My pulse pounded in my ears as I turned the handle and pulled the door open. I stared down into the dim basement, the light from the hallway casting long shadows over the clutter. Everything was quiet now. Too quiet. My heartbeat thundered as I took the first step down. Then another. With every step, my dread grew heavier. Then I saw it. The boxes that had been moved before. They weren't just out of place. They had been arranged in a way that partially concealed something. A door. A door I had never seen before. My breath caught in my throat. I moved forward, reaching out, my fingers brushing against the old wood. The handle was cool under my touch. This was it. This was what Emily had been hiding. I took a deep breath, then turned the handle and pushed the door open. And what I saw on the other side shattered my entire world. As the door creaked open, a dim, eerie red glow spilled out from the room beyond. My breath caught in my throat as I took a cautious step inside, my eyes struggling to adjust to the strange lighting. The space wasn't large, about the size of a walk-in closet, but it was nothing like the rest of the basement. The walls were covered in some kind of soundproof padding, muting any noise that might escape. The floor was bare concrete, and in the middle of the room sat a padded bench, positioned like the centerpiece of a stage. But it was what was on the walls that made my stomach churn. Shelves lined with toys, cuffs, and other things I could barely process. Everything was meticulously arranged, like a carefully curated collection. And standing in the middle of it all, Emily. She wasn't alone. 3 men surrounded her, all in various states of undress. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It felt like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare, like this couldn't possibly be real. But it was. Emily froze when she saw me. Her face drained of all color, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. The men turned, their expressions shifting from lustful amusement to sheer, stunned panic. Everything stopped. The red light cast grotesque shadows across the walls, distorting the scene in front of me like something out of a horror movie. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as the weight of the betrayal hit me like a truck. I felt sick. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had shared my life with, had turned our home into this. A secret place for things I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I opened my mouth, but no words came. What could I even say? What words could possibly match the rage and disgust clawing at my insides? One of the men, some smug-looking guy with a lazy grin, was the first to break the silence. "Hey man," he chuckled, hands raised in mock surrender. "Didn't know we had an audience. You wanna join in?" My vision went red. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, my fist flew. The impact was solid, bone meeting bone with a sickening crack. Smug guy stumbled back, clutching his nose as blood spilled between his fingers. Chaos erupted. The other two men scrambled, grabbing for their clothes, tripping over themselves in their desperation to get away. Emily, still frozen in shock, made no move to stop them as they bolted toward the stairs, shoving past me in their panic. But I wasn't focused on them anymore. I turned my glare back to my wife, if I could even call her that anymore. She looked like she wanted to shrink into herself, her shoulders hunched, her hands clutching at the sheets like they could somehow shield her from what she had done. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing for them. Nothing but cold, unrelenting fury. "What the hell is this?" My voice was low, dangerously steady. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. I can explain." I let out a hollow laugh. "Explain? Really?" I gestured around the room, at the shelves, the walls, the goddamn red light casting a hellish glow over everything. "Go ahead, Emily. Explain to me how you turned our basement into a goddamn brothel." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I snapped, taking a step closer. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that." She let out a broken sob, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way." I barked out a bitter laugh. "Oh, so you were planning on telling me? What, after how many more nights like this?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because we both knew the truth. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't a drunken lapse in judgment. This was planned. Deliberate. A secret she had been hiding right under my nose. I took a shaky breath, trying to reel in the storm of emotions threatening to drown me. Then I noticed something. In the corner of the room, mounted high on the wall, was a small camera. A camera, pointed directly at the center of the room. My stomach twisted. I stepped past Emily, ignoring her as she reached for me, and yanked the camera down from its mount. A cord trailed behind it, leading to a small recording device tucked behind a stack of boxes. I pulled it out and stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. Emily let out a strangled noise when she realized what I had found. "Please," she whispered. "Don't." I turned, holding the device up. "You recorded this?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but the anger in it was deafening. She shook her head rapidly, but I knew she was lying. I pressed a button. The screen flickered to life. And there it was. Not just tonight's betrayal. But others. Different nights. Different men. Over and over and over again. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just an affair. This was an entire double life. A world she had built in the basement of our home while I was away at work, trusting her, loving her. And she had recorded every single moment of it. I turned to her, my entire body shaking. "How long?" My voice was hoarse, barely audible. She covered her mouth with her hands, silent sobs racking her body. "How long?" She let out a broken breath. "Almost a year. A year. 12 months of lying. 12 months of sneaking around. 12 months of looking me in the eye and pretending to be my wife while she did this." My grip tightened on the recording device. I had all the proof I needed. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I stood there, gripping the recording device so tightly my knuckles turned white. My whole world had just caved in, and the weight of it pressed down on my chest, suffocating me. Emily sobbed, standing there in that disgusting little red-lit room, tears streaming down her face. She looked wrecked, pathetic even, like she actually expected me to feel sorry for her. I didn't. Not even a little. "Almost a year," I repeated, my voice eerily calm. "A whole goddamn year, Emily." She sniffled, hugging herself as if that would protect her from the reality of what she had done. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I let out a bitter laugh. You didn't mean for it to happen? What exactly did you not mean, Emily? The part where you brought other men into our house? The part where you set up a whole damn red room in our basement? Or the part where you recorded it all? She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head like she could block out my words. But I wasn't letting her escape this. You're gonna stand there and tell me you didn't mean for this to happen? That it was some kind of mistake? I stepped closer, forcing her to look at me. Because from where I'm standing, this looks a hell of a lot like a choice. Her lips trembled. I was lonely. That was it. That was the excuse she was going with. I felt my blood boil. Lonely? I echoed, my voice shaking with rage. You were lonely? I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You think I wasn't lonely, Emily? You think I wasn't exhausted? You think I wasn't busting my ass to build a life for us while you were down here, playing house with whoever the hell these guys are? She flinched, fresh tears falling, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I turned my back to her, breathing hard, trying to keep myself from putting my fist through the wall. I glanced back at the recording device in my hands, my mind racing. I had her. Every single one of her betrayals was right here, in this tiny little black box. And she knew it. Emily's breath hitched as she took a shaky step forward. Please, she whispered. Just delete it. No one else has to see it. We can talk about this. We can. I turned on her so fast she actually recoiled. Talk about it? I hissed. You want to talk about it now? After a whole goddamn year? She sobbed, hands clasped together. I'll do anything, just, please don't. I shook my head, a cold laugh escaping me. You don't get to beg, Emily. Not after this. She let out another broken sob, but I had no sympathy left to give. I turned and walked out of that disgusting room, gripping the recording device like it was my lifeline. Emily scrambled after me, pleading, but I didn't stop. I climbed the basement stairs, each step feeling like I was clawing my way out of a nightmare. When I reached the living room, I turned to face her one last time. I'm done. My voice was steady, final. Don't follow me. Then I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door. I didn't look back. That night, I checked into a hotel on the other side of town. I sat on the bed, staring at the recording device, my mind replaying everything I had seen over and over again. It would be so easy to destroy her. To send this to everyone she knew. To expose her to the world for what she really was. But I didn't rush it. I needed to be smart. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Divorce, I said, my voice flat. As fast as possible. The lawyer asked the usual questions. Why? What assets were involved? How contested this might be? I answered everything as mechanically as possible. Then I brought up the recordings. Would they be useful? I asked. The lawyer hesitated. If they prove infidelity, absolutely. But there's a risk in distributing them. It could backfire legally. I nodded, already knowing what I had to do. I wasn't going to just walk away and let her pretend this never happened. She had humiliated me. Destroyed our marriage. She didn't get to walk away without consequences. So I made a plan. Over the next few days, I prepared everything. I gathered every piece of evidence I had, made copies of the recordings, and sent them to the people who needed to see them most. Emily's family. Her closest friends. People who thought they knew her. And then, I waited. It didn't take long. The fallout was immediate. Emily's phone calls started almost instantly. At first, they were just desperate messages, pleading, crying, begging me to take it all back. Then the anger came. She called, screaming at me, accusing me of ruining her life, of being cruel back. I let her calls go unanswered. Because I wasn't the one who ruined her life. She did. And she was going to have to live with that. The fallout hit Emily like a wrecking ball. I heard about it through mutual friends. Her family had practically disowned her. Her mother, the same woman who had once told me I was the best thing that ever happened to her daughter, was now refusing to speak to her. Her brother, who I'd always gotten along with, sent me a message saying, I had no idea, man. I'm so sorry you went through that. Her friends, most of them abandoned her the moment they saw the truth. A few tried to defend her at first, saying, mistakes happen, people deserve second chances. But when the full extent of it came out, the secret room, the recordings, the sheer number of men, there was no coming back from that. She became a pariah overnight. I didn't respond to her calls or texts, but she didn't stop trying. Some were desperate, others were filled with venom. You ruined my life. You didn't have to do this. I made a mistake, but you went too far. I didn't reply to a single one. Because I wasn't the one who went too far. She had spent a year betraying me, humiliating me, lying straight to my face. And the moment she got caught, she expected me to just delete everything and pretend it never happened? No. She had to live with it now. Just like I had to. A couple of weeks passed. I had moved out of the hotel and into a small apartment on the other side of town. The divorce papers had been filed, and it was only a matter of time before it was finalized. I thought I was done with her. But then, late one night, I got a message that sent a chill down my spine. It was from an unknown number. We need to talk. Face to face. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to ignore it. But something in my gut told me I already knew who it was from. And I was right. A few minutes later, another message came in. Emily needs those recordings gone. You know why. I let out a slow breath, feeling my pulse quicken. So this wasn't just about her shame. Someone else was involved, someone who didn't want proof of what had happened in that room. I didn't respond. But I knew this wasn't over. The next night, I got back to my apartment late. As I stepped into the parking lot, I had that gut feeling, the one that tells you you're being watched. I turned my head slightly, scanning the lot. 3 figures stood near the edge of the street. And then one of them stepped forward. I recognized him immediately. Smug guy. The one I had punched in the basement. And behind him, the other 2 men. Emily wasn't with them, but I had no doubt she was the reason they were here. I clenched my fists. You lost or something? Smug guy grinned. Nah, man. We just need a favor. I said nothing. One of the other guys crossed his arms. Delete the recordings. I let out a humorless laugh. Yeah. And if I don't? Smug guy took a step closer. Then we're gonna have a problem. I tilted my head. Oh, we already have a problem. His grin faltered slightly. The old me, the guy who trusted his wife, the guy who believed in second chances, might have been afraid. But that guy was dead. I reached into my jacket, my fingers closing around the handle of something cold, sharp, and deadly. I had prepared for this. I had expected this. I took a slow breath, letting my body relax as I slipped the blade from my pocket and held it loosely by my side. If you think I'm scared of a bunch of guys who had to sneak around behind my back like cowards, I said, my voice steady, then you don't know who you're messing with. Smug guy's eyes flickered down to the knife in my hand. And suddenly, he wasn't grinning anymore. One of the other guys muttered something under his breath, nudging the third man to back up. I took a step closer, forcing them to be the ones retreating. You show up here again, I said quietly, and I won't just be holding a knife. Smug guy swallowed, his confidence crumbling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The other 2 hesitated before following. I stood there, watching them disappear into the night, my heartbeat steady. They thought they could intimidate me. They thought wrong. The next morning, I packed my bags. I had already planned to leave the city, but last night had confirmed it. I wasn't sticking around for Emily's mess any longer. I booked a ticket back to my hometown, somewhere far enough away that no one could find me unless I wanted them to. Before I left, I made one final decision. I deleted the recordings. Not because Emily asked. Not because I was afraid. But because I didn't need them anymore. She had already lost everything. And I had won. With that, I turned off my phone, tossed it into my bag, and walked away. Away from the betrayal. Away from the past. Away from her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The train ride back to my hometown was quiet. I sat by the window, watching the scenery blur past, my thoughts surprisingly empty. For the first time in weeks, My mind wasn't looping over everything that had happened. I wasn't thinking about Emily. I wasn't thinking about the basement. I wasn't thinking about the men who had tried to scare me. It was over. And I was finally moving on. I had no real plan, no clear idea of what came next. But for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. I arrived early in the morning, the town still half asleep. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, the streets quieter, the buildings more worn down. But there was something comforting about that. I had rented a small house on the edge of town, just enough space for me and no one else. The place was old, the kind that creaked when the wind blew too hard, but it was mine. I spent the next few weeks settling in. I got a new job, nothing fancy, just enough to keep me busy. I started going to the gym again, filling the empty hours with something productive. And most importantly, I stopped looking over my shoulder. For a while, I half expected Emily to find me, or one of those guys from the basement to show up again, thinking they could take one last shot at intimidating me. But nothing happened. Emily was gone. Those men were gone. That life was gone. One night, as I sat on my front porch with a beer in my hand, I realized something. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel broken. For the first time since I had walked into that basement, I just felt free. I thought back to the day I left the city. The moment I deleted those recordings. I had thought I was doing it because I didn't need them anymore. But now I realized something else. Holding on to them, holding on to that anger, it would have kept me trapped. It would have made me just as stuck in the past as she was. And I wasn't going to be that person. Not anymore. I finished my beer, exhaled slowly, and leaned back in my chair. Tomorrow would be just another day. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to it. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.